Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Bubble Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, we have on many occasions spoken about, oh yes, and we have a new member of the Gaggle. He's might provide a balance towards Buddy, because Buddy is just such an overwhelming, powerful personality that I can't cope with him. So maybe now I have a new ally. Who is this person, Peter? You should introduce him.
His name is Apple, and I picked him up a couple of hours ago. He's like about 6 weeks old, and Buddy is already telling me, "Don't talk about him." Okay, I'm talking about him. Okay, and so he's joining the Gaggle family, and he's had an exhausting day, and he'll be sitting here on my lap. Okay.
Yes.
So.
Well, let's hope he'll be a little more understanding and sympathetic than Buddy ever was. I mean, Buddy's just saying, "Hey, what's going on with the tip jar? It's your fault. You're the one who's failing us here." So maybe Apple be a little bit more sympathetic.
So far, so good. Yes.
So, hey, Peter, we've talked many times about Victoria Nuland and about the malevolent role that she has played in U.S. foreign policy going back many decades. From the time that she was in the Clinton administration. But we also occasionally talked about her husband, who is no less a malevolent force in American politics, which is Robert Kagan.
Yeah,
Robert Kagan is,
the
of
apple
course,
doesn't fall far from the tree.
exactly. He's a scion of the Kagan family. His father, Donald Kagan, was an eminent classical scholar at Yale. His brother, I think Frederick Kagan, and he runs. He's also a kind of a neocon, and then his I guess that's his sister-in-law, Kimberly Kagan, so Frederick Kagan's wife. She runs the Institute for the Study of War. So they are. This is the neocon family of the United States, always calling for war, always demanding America intervene or invade somewhere, and always avoiding going to war themselves. You know, always making sure that they themselves will not be in harm's way, nor will their children be in harm's way. So it's always,
and they
somebody
never
else.
admit that they were wrong. Okay?
Never,
Iraq
exactly.
was actually a success.
Exactly.
On,
They
it was
never
a
admit the war
success,
because
really.
we're always on to the next war.
And I think it's fair to say, given the current context, they are Israel firsters as well.
Absolutely, very powerful Israel firsters, and of course Robert Kagan was a very influential figure in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq. It started back in the 1990s when he and Bill Kristol kind of set up the project for the New American Century, and they were very enthusiastic and urging an attack on Iraq in the 1990s, long before 9/11. So they simply seized on 9/11, blamed this on Saddam Hussein, and then they got their war. So that Kagan is just very much of that Kagan, Kristol, Fromm. That's the word. But anyway, recently, we talked about this other gaggle. He wrote a long article in the Washington Post. He's a columnist at the Washington Post, essentially calling for an assassination of Trump. I mean, he's saying basically it's unavoidable. Trump will be president, and he believes that hey, there's not, he's going to get out of all these things, all these lawfare. It's not going to succeed. Well, basically, there's only one way out: how to deal with the Trump problem.
Yeah, so Squeaky Fromm, she could fire off a round that never got near Gerald Ford, and she was arrested. She was at first, I think, prosecuted under I don't know what the name of the laws, but you have to be, you cannot even vocalize threatening the killing the president of the United States, and she went to prison for it. And this is part of the Manson family. But no, our friend here, he could put it into a broad sheet and get away with it.
Exactly, that's exactly right. So today he has a very long article in the Washington Post in which he is attacking the Republican Party. And the Republican Party, because it is not going down the path that was laid down by him, his neoconservative friends, and Bill Kristol, and the others, who said that you have to be an interventionist and be ready to wage wars forever. And he's very angry, and he's saying the most outrageous thing you could say, the Republicans are going back to pre-World War II isolationism. With Trump as their leader, they're going back to those terrible, terrible days
And that's
before
a
World War
bad
II.
thing? And that's
Exactly,
a bad
that's a
thing?
bad thing. Exactly. You know, many people will be reading and thinking, okay, well, that was a pretty nice America. That wouldn't be a bad place to go back to. So I want to just show you a few things from this article. And here we have, pull this up. So here's the headline. Trump's anti-Ukraine view dates to the 1930s.
Oh, well, the 1930s, that's their favorite decade, isn't it?
Exactly. It's always that's the favorite decade. You know, always everything is always in that paradigm. It's very interesting why that's the paradigm to go back to rather than the pre-1914 when everybody was ready to jump the gun, everybody was ready to mobilize, and everyone was ready to go to war. I mean, that used to be the thing. Hey, we don't want to go back to that. It's the last thing, you know, where no one can stop nations just marching off to war. And that was when Barbara Tuchman wrote that book. Was it Trumpets of War or whatever it was called?
The Guns of August?
The Guns of August. Yeah, that's right. Which JFK was very impressed by, precisely because, hey, you know, this is not where we want to go. Just simply an inexorable mobilization.
Yeah, well, you know, Kagan would have a problem actually if he were to go back to 1914 or like 1917. Because there's a very strong historical argument, which I tend to agree with, actually, is that the United States should not have intervened in 1917 in the European
No,
War.
I don't think so at all.
I don't think there was any.
No,
I think
no.
we have a lot of retrospect, and I still don't see the positive argument that it was a good idea.
Absolutely, I agree with that. And then he says, Trump's and he dates to the 19th. America rejected it then. Will we now? And so
Well,
he goes.
I'm not sure they did reject it in the 1930s. I'm sorry.
No, I know. Go on. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, it was elites that connived. I mean, the historical record is so clear that what Franklin Roosevelt was doing, and he was doing it for a lot longer than many years before 1941. Okay,
that's exactly correct. You're absolutely correct, because he was doing this secretly, lying to the public, because he was in fact a de facto participant in the war. I mean, he was effectively fighting on Britain's side against Germany, and Germany knew this. Germany knew exactly what Roosevelt was doing. He was effectively a participant in the war. He was violating the neutrality laws that Congress had adopted, and he was lying to the public. It's not like, oh, well, you know, because the public is with me. Well, if the public is with you, why don't you then come out in the open and say, yeah, I'm just simply going to ignore the neutrality laws.
And also, you know, because of our technological age, the newspaper op-eds and editorials are readily accessible. Let's look at the New York Times and the Washington Post. You know, they were saying, you know, making a very strong case that why should the United States get involved in the European war to save the British Empire?
Exactly.
That was said over and over and over again. Exactly. It's no secret, okay?
That's exactly.
So they want us to go in, our former colonial master,
right,
and we're supposed to save their project? Really?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that was why it was precisely the following the World War I intervention, when Americans lost many lives, and they asked, for what? Why did we lose all these lives? I mean, what did we achieve to ensure, you know, a world run by the British and the French and their empires? I mean, what's in it for us? So he says, many Americans seem shocked that Republicans would oppose helping Ukraine at this critical juncture in history. Don't Republican members of Congress see the consequences of a Russian victory for America's European allies, for its Asian allies, and ultimately for the United States itself? Notice how he's talking to himself. Who are these many Americans who are saying all this? What happened to the party?
And he's talking down, okay,
yes, of course,
as they like to do.
Like exactly. What happened to the party of Ronald Reagan? That is such a, I'm so tired of that cliche. What happened to the party of Ronald Reagan? I mean, we've talked about this many times, but, but they created this caricature of Ronald Reagan, and then they use this to silence all argument by, well, Ronald Reagan, I'm a Ronald Reagan Republican. This is the party of Ronald Reagan. Yeah, you made up who Ronald Reagan was.
Yeah, but the problem with the metaphor, the meme of Ronald Reagan is that you can use it to argue anything you want.
Exactly. That's absolutely right. And then clearly people have not been taking Donald Trump's resurrection of America First seriously. It's time they did. And then he says, the original America First Committee was founded in September 1940. Consider the global circumstances at the time. 2 years earlier, Hitler had annexed Austria and invaded and occupied Czechoslovakia. 1 year earlier, he had invaded and conquered Poland. In the first months of 1940, he invaded and occupied Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Early June 1940, British troops evacuated from Dunkirk. France was overrun by the Nazi blitzkrieg. Now, the problem when you put it all in like that is that, well, Britain and France have got themselves into a mess. They issued guarantees, and now they're at war with Germany. Well, once you're at war, all bets are off. So it's not like Hitler suddenly invaded Norway. I mean, Norway was, following the British venture to help Finland fight against the Soviet Union and to get their hands on Sweden's iron ore, prevent Germany from getting iron ore. So, Hitler, I mean, once you go down this path of war, then a lot of countries are brought in. But the problem was, that Britain and France did something that America very smartly not done. Americans had not issued a blanket guarantee and commit themselves to going to war.
The kind of the thumb sketch of the Versailles Treaty and the consequences of the peace is that it was too hard or it was too easy on Germany. This totally misses the point. The point is what George just said, which was written about exhaustively, is that why are we giving security guarantees for countries we cannot protect? I mean, the British and the French. What you've done is you didn't allow Germany into the international system. You barred the Soviet Union, and that you give security guarantees to countries that cannot resist. Okay, gotcha. So you're obligated. So why should the United States be obligated for something that the British and the French did for Poland? Right. Why?
Well, that's it.
Because they weren't even part of it. We can talk about the ethical element of it, the humane element, but I mean, you made a system where it was inherently weak, and you want us to come again, the 1970 and now 1941 again.
Well, that's the thing that Britain and France made this decision August 1939 to issue this blanket guarantee to Poland and Romania. And so on. Well, this was, America didn't go down that path. America said, well, they thought this was a very silly thing to do. But once you've done that, and once you've now gone to war against Germany, well, what do you expect Germany to do? Germany say, well, hey, France has declared war against us. We need to do something about it. So you can't say, well, Germany attacked France. Yeah, okay. Germany attacked France after France had declared war on Germany. Germany did not want to go to war against France. But that's the point. When you get when you get into a war and you go into this escalatory mode, then suddenly a lot of countries are brought in, and that's an inevitability. The answer, of course, is not to do that. Don't start issuing guarantees that you really have no means of enforcing, and which can have all sorts of vast ramifications, like a war throughout the continent of Europe.
Yes, and remember, everyone, Britain and France declared war against Germany in September 1939 after the invasion of Poland, which, as George said, pointed out, there were security guarantees which were never met. Okay, what did they do for Poland? Nothing. Okay, yeah. and then the Nazis invaded France in May. It was called the phony war for a reason. As George just said, they didn't want to go to war.
Right. Well, you
And,
never.
but of course, you had people like Churchill, who had just come to power. And I know how to fix this. I'm going to get the Americans involved.
Right. No, exactly. They didn't want to go to war, but they also didn't want to accept Hitler's peace terms, because Hitler was then, from September 1939 through to May 1940, he was offering a peace. So let's end this. I mean, we don't have a quarrel. I don't want to change Germany's western borders. I'm happy with the situation. And remember, I mean, at this stage, Alsace-Lorraine, which Germany had coveted, was belonged to France. Hitler did not make any demands on Alsace-Lorraine, so he said, "But let's do a peace." Britain and France didn't want a peace. Well, then, if it's in a state of war, you can't then complain when Germany launched its attack on France. But the way he presents it is that, again, Hitler, the bad man, he starts invading all these countries. Hitler was certainly a bad man. It was a very bad regime, but that's not how you make decisions about statecraft. No one has ever gone to war against somebody else just because we don't like that form of government. We don't particularly like him. That's not a good basis for going to war.
But that has been the basis of elite foreign policy posturing. Is that George is absolutely right. I always forget the name. I don't know who wrote the seminal diplomatic history of the interwar period.
A.J.P. Taylor.
That's right.
Yeah.
Read the book, everyone. He doesn't say anyone's good. Doesn't say anybody's bad.
Right.
It's not. It's immaterial to a realist like that. Right. He just looked at the diplomatic cables, pronunciation, how each country defines their national interests, their security interests. That's the way we should think about politics. Okay.
Exactly.
But ever since the 1930s, it's been warped.
Exactly. It says, in September, the very month of the committee's formation, German troops were in Paris, and Ed Morrow was reporting from London under bombardment by the Luftwaffe. Oh, bring in the cliche, Ed Morrow in London. And it's like, there's something so tired about that, the cliche about Ed Morrow in London. But anyway, that was the moment the America First movement launched itself into the battle to block aid to Britain. Now,
but of course, George, the way the rendered history to the present is that the American First movement was pro-Nazi. No, it wasn't. Okay?
Exactly, and that's why
I always do that.
Yes, of course, and that's why I want to just show a couple of highlights from an article in the Atlantic written in September 1940 by Charles Lindbergh, one of the founders of the America First movement, and this is his explanation of why he's opposing American involvement in the war. This is September 1940. This is already after all these things that Kagan lists. He said, the present war is a continuation of the old struggle among Western nations for the material benefits of the world. It's a struggle by the German people to gain territory and power. It is a struggle by the English and French to prevent another nation from becoming strong enough to demand a share in influence and empire. The ideologies of the opposing sides are but in keeping with the conditions in the countries they represent. And then it says, both sides in Europe are fighting for a right. It is the old story in the modern world, the right of conquest against the right of possession. Measured by their own standards of today or by their enemies' standards of yesterday and tomorrow, the Germans are as much in the right as the English and French, for right is not an absolute quality. It is relative to outlook, and outlook changes with conditions, varies from year to year and from generation to generation. I mean, it's much eloquent, but basically saying, we don't really have a dog in this fight. I mean, that's kind of what he's saying. And it says, the English and French claim they are right in fighting to maintain their possessions and their ethics and the status quo of their last victory. The Germans, on the other hand, claim the right of an able and virile nation to expand, to conquer territory, influence by force of arms, as other nations have done at one time or another throughout history. And that is clearly true. I mean, the English and French were saying, hey, we've got a nice gig. We've got empires. We have prosperous countries and, lots and lots of overseas possessions. We don't want anyone else coming in and messing anything up for us. And
and embedded in that here is it's extremely important, and the status quo of their last
Right.
victory.
Yes,
Yeah, because they're the ones that dictated the terms of the peace. The
exactly.
Germans had no say in it whatsoever.
None, literally, they had no say. I mean, it was presented to them as a fait accompli. They had to sign, and that was that. And then our policy, this is, in other words, American policy, should be to prevent these European wars if we can, and otherwise to stand aside while the nations of Europe find their own destiny and adjust to their changing birth rates and conditions. We must stand aside, if for no other reason than that one strong Western nation may be left to preserve the flame of civilization and to lead the way from the chaos that will come to Europe if this war goes on. Somewhere among us, that flame must be kept burning if the civilization too is not to lie with the bones of marble and of bronze that represent the greatness of Rome and Greece and Egypt and Babylon. In other words, it says, we don't want to go down the path of mutual destruction, which the Europeans seem to be eager to do, which is what happened. They did destroy themselves in two wars.
Twice in 1 century.
Exactly,
yes.
for reasons that again seem very baffling now. But that's
And if you think about it, because of the settlement after the First World War, and it's often said, and I agree with it, it made the Second World War inevitable. But by not allowing the other great powers to be shareholders was the mistake. And that mistake, as the outcome, is what did Europe get? It got itself partitioned by the United States and the Soviet Union. And so
exactly.
Lindbergh was prescient,
Yes, exactly. No, it was very, very, very smart. He's been bad mouthed, for years and years, all the, there's constantly attack, because he always labeled as if he's a fascist and so on.
Yeah, there was that mini series. I think you and I briefly talked about it. It was an alternative history if Lindbergh had become president.
Right. Well, it was based on that guy's book, Philip Roth. I think Philip Roth spoke about that. Yeah. Completely absurd because, again, as we see here, he's not in any way sympathetic to Nazism or Nazi Germany. He's just saying, hey, look, we just don't have a dog in this fight. This is,
it was, but why should the U.S. in 1940 be sympathetic to the French and British? Give me a reason. I like their cuisine. I like their culture. I like their, their, what they wear. Got some great perfume over there. But I mean, you want us to bleed for you?
Exactly. And we did that in 1917 and 1918. We're not going to do that again. So here, and then we go back to Kagan, and he says, cutting off Ukraine seems like small beer by comparison, but behind it lies the same America first thinking. Notice again, there's something bad about America first. You think, well, shouldn't that really be your guiding principle? If you're an American president, America first. I mean, why am I worrying about what the hell's going on the eastern border of Ukraine or Taiwan or all these other places? Kind of, I was entrusted to essentially put America first.
Well, and what was the foreign policy bumper sticker that the Biden administration trotted out? An American foreign policy for the middle class.
Yeah, that's it. The middle class. Yeah. That's right.
I guess that one didn't go well. It didn't go through the focus group too well.
Yeah, the tanked. Yeah, a middle class foreign policy. That's when they were trying to out Trump. Yeah, that's a middle class foreign policy. For Donald Trump and his followers, pulling the plug on Ukraine is part of a larger aim to end America's broader commitment to European peace and security. Always sounds good, broader commitment. What does that mean?
Wait, what do you mean? The Europeans don't have the internet? They don't have industry? They don't have indoor plumbing?
Right.
I mean, they don't have educational institutions?
Exactly.
They make some pretty good cars.
Yeah,
they make some good pens.
Yeah.
Why but they don't have the wherewithal to defend themselves?
That's the thing. It's 80 years now since the end of World War II. And yet when you read these things, and Kagan, he's the smartest of them, but this is standard in the Washington Post and New York Times. It's forever 1945. Europe is just this lying prostrate unable to do anything. It requires America to take everything over. So you got a crisis on your hands there, Peter?
I'm okay. I'm okay. So sorry.
So then he goes on. Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, has called for the immediate reduction of U.S. force levels in Europe and the abrogation of America's Common Defense Article 5 commitments. He wants
which everyone, okay, when he's talking about the Article 5 commitment of the NATO treaty, Josh Hawley is not saying something that we haven't heard before. Oh, George, when NATO was established, that debate started. Remember?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So under the Constitution, it is the American Congress that has to vote to war. So if something happens on Ukraine's eastern border, the United States is obligated to involve itself, bypassing Congress. This was something that Republicans in the 1950s struggled with mightily, and the issue never disappeared. Really,
you're absolutely right, because the one of the leading opponents of the North Atlantic Treaty in 1949 was Senator Robert Taft, who was the Republican majority leader, very right wing. He was, he was no liberal, but he said this treaty is going to obligate us to go to war all the time. We're going to have to go to war, and he kind of saw also even that again. He didn't like the Soviet Union, didn't like communism, but thought, the Soviet Union is going to look at this and see this as a threat. So if we want less Soviet Union, less communism, this isn't the way to go about it, because they're gonna mobilize when they see this North Atlantic Treaty and the number of countries that were already being brought in right in that first batch, before they even expanded it to bring in Greece and Turkey and then finally Germany. So there's a lot of countries already brought in under the North Atlantic Treaty right at the start.
And remember, everyone, NATO came first, then the Warsaw Pact Treaty Organization. That was a reaction to what George just said. Yeah. Okay, because it to use the parlance of today, the West is escalating. Okay, and Russia, then the Soviet Union reacted to it.
Exactly. And again, who was against this? Robert Taft, Walter Lippmann, again, no raving liberal, and George Kennan himself. And Kennan was a member of the Truman administration. He was actually in the administration, and he still thought that this was a bad idea. So these are the people. It's all fun to attack Trump, but there were people right at the beginning who said this is a really bad idea and it's going to end in disaster for us.
George, you just went through these names. They're luminaries. I mean, these people were giants of their time.
Right.
Giants.
Right.
Where are they in this article?
No, nowhere to be seen.
Nowhere to be seen.
Right. Exactly. And it says, so Hawley, he wants the United States to declare publicly that in the event of direct conflict between Russia and the NATO ally, America will withhold forces. So I just looked at what it is Hawley said. So here, this is a recent speech by Hawley. He said, we cannot meet Ukrainian, Taiwanese, and our own military requirements all at the same time for the foreseeable future. In other words, we can't do everything. And frankly, we shouldn't have to. Some of the world's wealthiest nations are our allies in Europe, but right now, we're the only ones doing the heavy lifting. In fact, we've sent more weapons to Ukraine than all Europe has combined, and those choices are weakening us in the one place, the Pacific, where we require strength. So Hawley is no isolationist. He just thinks China is the big threat. We should focus on China. You can agree or disagree, but
he's taking the Mearsheimer. He's taking the Mearsheimer line. Yeah.
Exactly. And then he goes on. Strengthening deterrence in the Indo-Pacific means scaling back our military commitments elsewhere. That brings us to Europe. What we need is new burden-sharing arrangement within NATO. Our NATO allies should lead in arming Ukraine, and they should also take responsibility for defending Europe itself, relying on the US only for extended nuclear deterrence and a few other capabilities. This will free up American resources for deterring China. It'll also ensure that NATO allies can deter Russia or defend themselves with limited US support if our forces are drawn to a crisis or conflict in the Pacific. Now, Kagan is, absolutely furious about this because he thinks that, America should be fighting wars everywhere. I mean, you can't just simply say, well, it's either this or that. No, everything. It's like, we should, fight everywhere, mobilize for war, and again, making sure that neither he nor his children will actually be called up to fight.
Also, embedded, I think I can honestly and fairly say, embedded in Hawley's words, because I would add a couple of other sentences here, and I think it would give more clarity what he says, is that if NATO is held responsible for its own security, it may go down a different path,
right,
and deal with what it believes is a security threat. See, while they're in NATO, you don't have to make that decision. The Americans make that decision.
Right.
But if the Europeans were left to their own devices, they'd say, well, I mean, is Russia really that kind of a threat to us? Okay. That's what Kagan and these other people never want to confront, because they don't want their supplicants to have agency.
That's exactly right. No, that's absolutely right. And that's the problem with this NATO, because NATO, it creates this artificial alliance or transatlantic alliance in which the non-European power gets to call all the shots in Europe. And of course, this non-European power wants to make sure that Europe will never be a rival. And therefore, it sows division in Europe. It wants to make sure that there's deep divisions between Russia and Europe. The last thing it wants is a European continent which says, we don't really need America here. I mean, we're good to go. I mean, so yeah, that's what happens when you have this NATO. And America is going to pursue its goals as it has from the beginning.
It's so amazing if you look at official discourse. See, George said the quiet part out loud, is that, yes, we have the Atlantic Alliance, we're in this together and all this. But in fact, it's what the United States is doing is that it wants to use the Europe as a bastion against Russia, where the United States can look elsewhere, but at the same time, take the Europeans out at their knees. Okay, so then it ends up being a slippery slope where you have to depend.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this dependency is so toxic.
Exactly. It's a total dependency. The Americans are very happy with this dependency, and the Europeans, like when you're hooked on welfare. I mean, you don't want to get off because it's so easy. You got to go on enjoying the welfare benefits.
And that worked, George. That worked because I am absolutely convinced when you look at the second and third wave of expansion into the of NATO, I don't think any of these countries thought we're preparing to fight the Russians. Then no, I mean this is part of a club. It's really quite amazing to me when you see a Macron and you have Sergeant Schultz and then you have Sikorsky. That's exactly what the Sikorskys want. We want to be at the adult table, but the monitor is still the classroom. Cafeteria monitor is still the Americans. Okay.
Exactly.
And so again, this is elite interest. He said the last thing over the last 2 years and a couple months, the last thing we've heard coming out of Europe is security. Nobody talks about security because when you start talking about security, you can talk about peace.
That's right. But that's as you said, you listen, this is an elite project, and these elites, they desperately want Biden to stay there because this is the kind of person they want in America, who's just going to go on the same old nonsense year in, year out. And they're not going to have to do anything. They're not going to have to make any decisions. They go to these conferences, make all the
cocktail parties, supper club, as George called it.
Exactly. And they've been dreading, and this has been going on for a long time. They've been dreading a president who's going to come along and say, "Oh, let's bring this to an end. We're America. We have our own domestic problems. We can't go on bailing out Europe forever." They've been dreading this. At some point, some American president is going to say that. They've given hints at it, Bill Clinton gave a hint at it, but never followed through. Obama hinted at it, never really followed through. Trump kind of gave stronger hints, didn't follow through. But they're dreading that somebody sometime, whether it's Josh Hawley or J.D. Vance, is going to say, hey, look, we've got to attend to our own problems. You're going to have to work things out yourself here in Europe.
As far as I know, they have a bridge they have to rebuild.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, and then he goes on here. What concrete steps can we take towards this new burden sharing arrangement? This is Hawley.
This is his writing style. He always does this. First, second, third.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. He has that it's that CEO way of presenting it. Yeah. First, 1, 2, 3. First, we should cut off U.S. military aid to Ukraine until our European allies step up. That causes anguish in Europe. That won't happen so long as we're doing their job for them. Second, we should clarify the stakes for our European allies. They should know we won't be able to fully defend them if a conflict with China breaks out. We must make clear that given the Chinese threat and the need for deterrence, we will be forced to withhold forces from any direct conflict with Russia. So even if US forces aren't at war in the Pacific, Europe still can't count on us like they used to. We should begin reducing US force levels in Europe, and we should keep cutting until we're supporting NATO defenses with only those capabilities we don't need to deter China. And with our nuclear arsenal, our European allies can make up the difference. They must take the lead in Europe's conventional defense. So all this is, Europeans absolutely hate this. And we know why the European intelligence agencies got themselves so involved in the 2016 election, and they probably will in this year's election. And they'll do the same if and when Josh Hawley runs for president. They don't want to hear this. They don't want to hear anything like this, that basically Europeans are going to have to pony up the money or make their own accommodation to Russia and decide, hey, Russia's our neighbor and we have to figure something out with Russia. But we can't go on with this constant Cold War and this constant huge spending levels as if we're right in the middle of a Cold War.
What was, up until February of 2022, what was Europe's biggest selling point? What was it proud of? Prosperity.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. And security.
Right.
That was based on cheap energy.
Right.
Okay. And now I've always said, George, I mean, if Europe were left to its own devices, they would come to the conclusion that Russia is no threat to them whatsoever. Okay. Right. Exactly. And that's the last thing that the Americans want to hear. Because right. then Europe goes on its own. Okay.
That's exactly. Yeah.
Which I think the damage has been done. I see no good future for Europe at all. I don't at all.
I don't either. But that's why people like Kagan, they have to go to the pages of the New York Times, Washington Post, but then the others like Richard Haas and David Ignatius and the usual kind of chin-wagging foreign policy, they have to terrify us about the consequences. If we don't stand up in Ukraine, look at all the horrific, terrifying things that are going to ensue, which is, and Kagan goes into this as the article goes on. So Trump's Republican Party wants to take the United States back to the triad of interwar conservatism, high tariff, anti-immigrant xenophobia, isolationism.
So, no, I want interwar conservatism. I want high tariffs. I want a controlled border. Okay, yeah. He can whitewash and fear monger, but there's nothing wrong with interwar conservatism. America built itself on high tariffs. Okay, I mean, George, you could go back for 150 years of American, the United States of high tariffs. Yeah, that would have been an appropriate name.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's absolutely. And again, the anti-immigrant thing is that it's important to remember. Yeah, America for a short time in the 19th century had enormous high rates of immigration. And then it had, 40, 50 years of zero immigration. I mean, they say there was basically America put up the barriers and said, we don't want this anymore. So it's always, misleading when people talk about, oh, America is the land of immigrants. Yeah, at various periods of history did have immigrants inflow, and it also had barriers and saying no one comes in. It's much stricter than almost any other country. So and it only changed in the 1960s.
Yeah, but see, this is how propaganda works. See how interwar conservatism, high tariffs, anti-immigrant xenophobia, and they're put into the same pool. But these are all very different things, and these issues had very different constituencies. Okay, people would be surprised. As far as I wouldn't call it was called immigration control. That was very popular across the board.
Very popular because
very popular.
The idea behind it was, well, now that we have all these immigrants, probably was a mistake bringing so many in. We have to make sure that they are Americans, that we turn them into Americans. We don't want just a whole bunch of Irishmen, Germans, or whatever running around. We want Americans. And that's what they did. They spent, the next 40 years using the public schools to turn out Americans. And that was the idea behind this. So, you can't call it xenophobia. That's just basically saying, hey, we can't just simply keep importing people and still retain our national character.
And Kagan is being historically and morally dishonest. Isolationism. Talk to people in Latin America. What kind of isolationism America had during those decades?
No, exactly. Yeah, there was no isolationism when it came to America's hemisphere. There was always the Monroe Doctrine always applied. No one has any say or influence in our hemisphere. Republican anti-interventionism of those interwar years was less a carefully considered strategic doctrine than an extension of their battles against domestic opponents. Yes, there were self-proclaimed realists in the late 1930s assuring everyone that the United States was invulnerable and that events in Asia, where Japan was also on the rampage, and Europe need not endanger American security. But again, you have to make the case, how does it endanger American security? Again, that's a separate issue, whether you like the militarists in Japan or, whatever. That's a separate issue. Does it endanger American security? And the realists were saying, well, it doesn't. And why should we go to war for something that really doesn't endanger our security or affect our national interest?
Well, Kagan again is he's a historically nihilistic here. George, we've already mentioned it. Yes, there were self-proclaimed realists. I don't know why I put it in air quotes in the 1930s. Yeah, 1917, 1918. What did we get out of that?
Exactly. Those realists, again, the scare quotes, chided their fellow Americans for a giddy moralism and emotionalism in response to Nazi and Japanese aggression that prevented them from dealing with the world as it is, as historian Charles Beard put it. Again, why is that a bad thing? I mean, again, if you think that's wrong, why is that approach wrong? Who says we have to deal with the world as it is, and we shouldn't be in the business of trying to transform the world, and then and in doing so, we're going to get ourselves into a conflict with an awful lot of countries.
We're going to change the world, and then as a consequence, we have to deal with the world that we have created. We do it over and over and over again.
That's right. That's exactly right. Then he goes on, America's entry into World War II was, among other things, the triumph of a contrary view of the world. But remember, that came about because Hitler's declaration of war. So it wasn't like, oh, it was a triumph. Hitler really made that war inevitable by declaring war on the United States. FDR would not have been able to, as easily as that, to get himself into that war without the declaration of war by Hitler.
Because the America First Committee, its ideas were still operative because it was about the European War. Because you have to remember, the European War was ongoing. Right. Again, this is parlor talk at this point. But George is right. selling the American people and going to war with in Europe, they'd say, well, we just got attacked by the Japanese.
Right. That's right. Exactly. Even before Pearl Harbor, a majority of Americans, prodded by Roosevelt, came to view the advancing power of European fascism and Japanese authoritarian militarism as a threat not just to U.S. security, but also to liberal democracy in general. American entry into World War II was the victory of a liberal worldview over an anti-interventionism rooted in a conservative anti-liberalism. So how come that in 1940...
That is just...
Right.
That's all hindsight. You know, you're telling me what it all means. At the time, that's not what people were thinking about. They were not thinking about, we have to fight for liberal democracy. No, that wasn't true.
And again, November 1940, Roosevelt is reelected, promising he's not going to get into a war. He promised the American people, I will not get into a war. His opponent, Wendell Willkie, said, no, absolutely no to a war. So that's your two leading candidates, both absolutely committing themselves to the American people that they are going to avoid getting into a war. So I don't know what big change in public opinion. Public opinion was absolutely dead set on getting involved in the war.
Okay, and George here, this is the trick that they always play here. This is actually perfect. American entry into World War II was a victory of a liberal world view. No, it was a set of policies that would justify a liberal imperialism. Yep, that's exactly what it was.
That's right, exactly, and that's what you got. The consequence of it. The victory remained largely intact throughout the Cold War and after the good days, although many conservatives eventually hopped on the internationalist bandwagon for the sake of fighting communism, and many on the left dissented from the liberal consensus. It was FDR's worldview that guided Republican presidents from Dwight D. Eisenhower to Richard M. Nixon to Reagan to the two Bushes. It was the belief that the United States had both an interest and an obligation to support a liberal, democratic, capitalist order, and to do so by committing to alliances and deploying hundreds of thousands of GIs, thousands of miles from America's shore.
And how did it work out, George?
Well, that's it. That's exactly my thought, because it's almost like Vietnam never happened. Now, the whole point of Vietnam was precisely that suddenly Americans, it dawned on Americans, something that, you know, was predicted by Walter Lippmann and Kennan earlier, you're going to get yourself into a very unpleasant war because you're fighting for something nebulous, you're fighting against communism, and you know, you're going to end up fighting against a nationalism. What are you gaining from this? And so, but it doesn't exist. Or again, or you know, was it 30 years later? It was Iraq. Oh, whoa, that's great. We're going to go to Iraq because Saddam Hussein is a bad guy and whatever. Well, how did that work out? So now you just go on FDR and, you know, and Reagan and so on, but these were all, you know, disastrous intervention based on some nebulous idea that somehow if you're championing liberal democracy, you know, and that's favoring America's national security. These are just cliches and which end in disaster.
Yeah, and it's really quite pathetic how casually Kagan mentions deploying hundreds of thousands of GI soldiers. Right. It's such a casual way of basically bloodletting the underclass. Everybody, right. Okay.
Yes.
Remember, the powers that be realized that conscription was bad for empire, right. It was bad politics. So, you know, get the underclass to fight your war. Right. Get brown people to kill other brown people.
Right, right. No, exactly. So you get the elites who managed to stay out of the war. You know, the George W. Bush, who managed to get into the National Guard so that he wouldn't have to actually serve.
Dick Cheney, I had other
commitments. Yeah, that's it, exactly. And they said Reagan's foreign policy was in many ways simply a resumption of the muscular international. Well, this is the robust internationalism of FDR, his one-time hero, and the liberal anti-communism of Harry Truman and Dean Acheson.
I don't know. I don't think the historical record based.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that, you know,
with the exception of the Western Hemisphere. Okay.
Right. Exactly. And then when you look at that, well, was that a successful policy? I mean, you know, waging that war against little Nicaragua. I mean, was that a success? I mean, how many people were killed? I mean, you know, in Guatemala, You call that a successful policy? Was it because of what, the liberal international order? I mean, how did the people who got killed feel about the liberal international order? So, and then it goes on, not all Republicans have forgotten this legacy. Today, when people like Mitch McConnell insist that what happens in Ukraine has a direct and vital bearing on America's national security and vital interest, he says these things, McConnell, but he never explains what direct and vital bearing on America's national security and vital interest. Just because you say it, it has a direct bearing, it doesn't mean that it does have a direct bearing. He just says it, cold, hard national interest. What cold, hard national interests are involved? They are articulating this liberal worldview, the assumption that the United States has an interest in the peace and security of predominantly liberal democratic Europe. Liberal democratic Europe. So there's this wonderful soaring rhetoric. Where is this liberal democratic Europe? In Ukraine? And so if Americans care,
I mean, why should he assume that it's the United States that should determine what peace and security means?
Right.
I mean, that's never been explained here, except for George and I, for hundreds, thousands of hours, have talked about elite capture. Okay, that's essentially what keeps it going.
That's right. That's right. If Americans care what happens in Europe, then they must care what happens in Ukraine. But this is,
why would Americans care what happened in Europe? Okay,
well, exactly. That's the first thing. And then they say they must care what happens in Ukraine. But then you say, why? This is precisely the kind of mess that you got into in Vietnam. Is that, well, we've now created NATO, and now we're going to go to Vietnam. And then you say, well, where? What's the commitment that you made in Vietnam? Who are you committed to? And then it goes, in other places where you just make up some commitment. You made up this commitment to Ukraine. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. There is no commitment there. You just made it up. And what Kagan does, or what everybody does, they always go from one to another. Oh, Europe, NATO, and then Ukraine, as if it's all one and the same. But basically, what you don't have any kind of a commitment to Ukraine. You just made this up.
What he does, at least what his elk do all the time, it's the fallacy of the fallacy of sunk sums. Okay, yeah. We can't stop now. Okay, we've put already too much of investment in this. We must go forward, even though you're getting negative returns.
Negative returns. No, it's the Kissinger used to talk about American credibility. Well, yeah, American credibility is on the line when you make stupid commitments, and then you realize after you've made the stupid commitment that you have no real means of fulfilling your commitment. Then you can say, well, American credibility is on the line, but the lesson should be, don't make stupid commitments, and then American credibility won't be on the line.
But if obviously the reference here is being made to the wars in Indochina, but it didn't negatively impact American credibility. It didn't. There was no domino theory. Okay. No. The difference here is that Kagan still, I'm sure George is going to show us here. This is a proxy war. This is not like a Angola. Okay. Where if one side wins, the other side loses. Okay, you lost a pawn on the chessboard. Okay, better luck next time. This is toe to toe with a superpower, with another great power. Okay, and that's something that George and I have talked a great deal about. Henry Kissinger. Kissinger would never envision doing something like that.
Right. Exactly. For should Ukraine fall to Russian control, it would move the line of confrontation between Russia and NATO hundreds of miles westward and allow Vladimir Putin to pursue his unconcealed ambition to restore Moscow's hegemony in Eastern and Central Europe. This is very interesting. It's a total backwards thinking, and projecting onto Vladimir Putin everything that you've been doing. They move the line of confrontation hundreds of miles westward. No, you move the line of confrontation hundreds of miles eastward. after the end of the Cold War. You moved right up to Russia's border. So that's where you move the line of confrontation. So, but he's, and then, we have his unconcealed ambition to restore Moscow's hegemony in Eastern Central Europe. And then you ask, okay, a quote, please. Can you give me a quote from one statement of Putin's where he suggests that we want to reinforce a hegemony in Eastern and Central Europe? I mean, if that's the case, they're not doing a very good job. I mean, it's like you're surrounded by these hostile states who spend every day figuring out how can we antagonize Russia all the more today more than we did yesterday. So he hasn't done a very good job of restoring hegemony in
Well, I mean, I don't know the percentages here, but if you look at the borders of Ukraine of 1991, and then you think in terms of the special military operation, Russia controls what, 22% of Ukraine after 2 years of war. So they're on their way to Warsaw. Okay, come
right,
on,
exactly.
it's
On the way to
Keystone,
Warsaw. Yeah.
Keystone Cops or James Bond. I mean, you got to choose.
It's exactly right. And then he goes on, but what of those Republicans who don't share that basic assumption? When Senator J.D. Vance tells Stephen Bannon that I don't really care what happens in Ukraine one way or another, that statement rests on a different assumption, namely that a liberal democratic Europe is of no value to the United States and that Americans should not be willing to fight for Germany and France any more than they should fight for Ukraine. How does he know that that's what J.D. Vance meant by that? He says, I don't really care what happens to Ukraine one way or another. He's kind of saying we don't have any alliance with Ukraine. I mean, we're nowhere near Ukraine, and it's basically not really within our bailiwick. Now, did he say I also don't really care about liberal democratic Europe. I come to think of it, I don't really care too much about France and Germany either. I mean, maybe that's what he thinks, but I don't know how you can just simply make all these inferences from what I think is a fairly reasonable statement by a senator from Ohio.
What does liberal democracy have to do with any of this,
Right,
George? It has
right.
nothing to do. That is why we are in the mess that we are now. If you think in terms of security, then we wouldn't be here.
Right.
But see, they don't want to do that because that will derail their hegemonic project. And so you don't think I mean, if you're thinking about liberal democracy, then, I think of Saudi Arabia, I think of Turkey, I think of, I mean, Taiwan only until just recently. Most of the post-war history of the Korean Peninsula was a pretty nasty piece of work. I mean, this is just scaremongering and sloganeering.
Right. And this is the thing about this is the neocons. The neocons make this about, you have to be for our perpetual wars, or you're against liberal democratic world order. And this is,
it's a false choice.
It's exactly. But this is what they've been doing. What's interesting is their reputation fell in the 1980s when they used to talk like this. And they were not held in high esteem in the 1980s because that was still Vietnam. People still had bad feelings about Vietnam. So there wasn't really much of an appetite for this sort of talk. But they made their comeback with George W. Bush and Iraq. And then you say, well, what is any of that liberal democratic order? But now they've been embraced by MSNBC and all the liberals. So, the liberals who used to hate the neocons, now they adore the neocons. So this article, I imagine, MSNBC is going to be lapping it up. In every show, they'll be quoting, lengthy chunks, even longer than we're doing. Wow, this is really wise. God, aren't these Republicans really terrible in turning their back on the liberal democratic order?
You'll miss Victoria Nuland before you know it. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. But also here, speaking of Victoria Nuland here, liberal democratic Europe. Well, let's go back to Nuland's telephone call with Jeffrey Piat. What should she think about Europe?
Yes, that's right. Exactly. That's right. She obviously does care about the European order. And then, like those of the 1930s forebears, today's Republicans' view on foreign policy are heavily shaped by what they consider the more important domestic battle against liberalism. Foreign policy issues are primarily weapons to be wielded against domestic enemies. But notice, again, the one person you quoted, Josh Hawley, that's not his position. He's just saying, I don't care about Ukraine. I mean, I want to focus on China. So I mean, there are people, yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene. You say, yeah, she doesn't care. She's interested in domestic battles. But is she really that influential? I mean, is that, she's not a senator. She has a certain following, but you can hardly say, well, she's a very powerful voice within the Republican Party.
Yeah, but see, what is Kagan trying to do here? It's obvious, everyone. He wants no debate on foreign policy.
No, absolutely.
That's the whole point of this article. We cannot debate these things, okay? And foreign policy issues are primarily weapons to be wielded against domestic enemies. Give me a break. I mean, again, that is just scaremongering, okay?
Right.
And pulling things out of thin air. I mean, that's from whole cloth.
That's a very good point, because why is it wrong for any elected politician to say, I don't think we should be spending our money on this. We should be spending it on something else. Now, I think that's kind of what you're supposed to be doing if you're an elected representative. You say, yeah, I think this is a complete waste of money. And then that's the view of her. That's the view of Matt Gaetz. Again, as I say, it's not a huge constituency, but that's their view. This is a total waste of money. We should be spending it on something else. So he wants to present domestic battle against liberalism. I mean, it's a domestic battle against those who are just squandering money on useless projects. And then today's Republicans depict their domestic opponents as, among other things, communists who are taking their orders from communist China. Republicans insist that President Biden is a communist.
No, no.
Exactly. It follows then that Biden must have a pro-Chinese Communist Party agenda. As the powerful Republican chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, Catherine McMorris Rodgers, has put it. She's very powerful. I'm not, but all right. Senator Marco Rubio has called President Beijing Biden. Well, that's after we got done with people calling Mitch McConnell Moscow Mitch, of all people, Mitch McConnell, because Mitch McConnell, I don't know, he held back some aid or whatever for something under Trump. Moscow Mitch, Lindsey Graham, they called him Leningrad Lindsey. I mean, it's like he just wasn't sufficiently anti-Russian.
Yeah, this is just ridiculous, childish inside baseball.
Exactly,
I mean,
it's childish.
All you get down is name calling. That's your foreign policy. That's name calling.
Name calling, exactly. Yeah, that's right. And just as World War II was the New Dealers' war, so Ukraine is the war of globalists. Hawley, killing many birds with one stone, warns, like his America First forebears, that a cabal of liberal globalists on the left and neoconservatives on the right is trying to impose a liberal empire on the world to make the world over in the image of New York and Silicon Valley.
Nicely said.
Nicely said. What makes these liberal globalists and neoconservatives dangerous, Hawley insists, is that they are not pursuing truly nationalist foreign policy because they themselves are not true Americans. Well, they're not. I mean, they spend their time at Davos or the Munich Security Conference talking to one another. So the GOP devotion to America First is merely the flip side of Trump's poison the blood campaign. We already talked about that. It's a complete misinterpretation of what he said. It is about the ascendancy of white Christian America and the various un-American ethnic and racial groups allegedly conspiring.
Oh, here we go. We got to use the race baiting. Yeah,
that's right. Exactly. And then this has long been evident in the Republican veneration of anti-liberal dictators such as Putin and Hungary's Viktor Orban. You got to bring Orban into this conservative.
Yeah, I'm sure on his notepad, Victor, or don't forget.
Exactly.
Got to slip him in there somewhere.
That's right. Yeah. We kind of where's Erdogan? We should also, he's usually makes an appearance at some point in these articles. Conservatives applauded when Putin warned in 2013 that the Euro-Atlantic countries were rejecting the Christian values that were the basis of Western civilization, denying moral principles and all traditional identities, national, cultural, religious, and even sexual.
He invokes this as if it's a bad thing.
It's a bad thing.
It's amazing. It's
That's right.
amazing.
That's right. Pat Buchanan put it best when he called Putin one of us, the voices of conservatives, traditionalists, and nationalists of all continents and countries, and praised him for standing up against the cultural and ideological imperialism of a decadent West. Well, what Buchanan was saying was that why are we so hostile to Russia? What is it that Russia stands for? And then he lists these things, as Putin says this in this speech. Well, that's kind of what I think. And that's what kind of a lot of conservative Americans think. So why exactly should we be hostile to Russia? But what's interesting is that he of course, he makes Republicans sound ridiculous. But here is Jamie Raskin. Remember what Jamie Raskin said at one point during this war? He says, Moscow right now is a hub of corrupt tyranny, censorship, authoritarian repression, police violence, propaganda, government lies, and disinformation, and planning for war crimes. It is a world center of anti-feminist, anti-gay, anti-trans hatred, as well as the homeland of replacement theory for export. In supporting Ukraine, we are opposing these fascist views and supporting the urgent principles of democratic pluralism. Ukraine is not perfect, but its society is organized on the radically different principles of democracy and freedom, which is why Russia's oligarchical leaders seek to destroy it forever. I am proud to have been banned from Putin's Russia and my pro-Ukrainian legislative activism, and I look forward to visiting Ukraine. So who exactly is the conspiracy theory? Who's presenting this as a global struggle? Saying, he's the right is presenting this as a global struggle against liberalism. When he's presenting this as a global struggle against, this conservative nationals, anti-feminist, anti-gay, and whatnot. And I think he even goes on.
Truly odious person here.
He is, yeah. Ukrainians today give the democratic world a chance for a critical and historic victory, and we must rally to their side. It is important to be on the right side of a just war, and it is even more important to be on the right side and win. Just as Ukrainian resistance gives us hope, a Ukrainian victory would give us an opening to a much better future for all humanity. All champions of democracy over autocracy, whether they call themselves progressive, conservatives, or liberals, should be doing whatever we can to ensure that Ukraine wins and wins this just war as quickly as possible. So that's so if then you kind of shivering. Oh, Pat Buchanan said this. Well, look at Jamie Raskin. I mean that is a real loony kind of conspiracy theory presenting the world, presenting this conflict as good versus evil.
It's a perspective on international politics through the lens of domestic battles at home.
Right. That's right. Then it doesn't really matter what Trump believes, nor does he need to withdraw formally from NATO to introduce massive instability. It will be enough that he and his advisors cast significant doubt on the reliability of America's Article 5 obligations.
Well, there should be a debate about that. Do
Exactly.
most people know what it means?
Yes, exactly. In this respect, those Trump Republicans who wish to sever American commitments to allies are not only bringing back a 1930s worldview. If they take power, they will bring us back to the 1930s world.
Yeah, but the people in power have brought us to the 1930s.
That's exactly right. They the ones who brought us to this. You, for no reason at all, you've brought us into a very serious conflict, and you want to continue. I mean, the whole point of this article is that you want to continue with this. You got to, all of it is an attempt. We got to send as much as possible to Ukraine, and not tomorrow, but yesterday. Imagine that Kiev falls a year or two into a second Trump term presidency, and that instead of responding by rushing to bolster the alliance's defenses with a more substantial American commitment, Trump expresses relative indifference. How will the nations of Europe respond? Russian troops will be hundreds of miles closer to NATO countries and will share a nearly 700-mile border with Poland. But if Republicans have their way, the United States will do nothing. It will be historical geopolitical revolution. Now, again, we lived for 40 years during the Cold War with Soviet forces in Berlin. We had Soviet forces occupying a number of countries of Eastern Europe, and everyone managed to get on with their lives. There was no great crisis. I mean, Soviets marched into Prague in '68. Everything carried on as normal in the West. So you're going to think of what Ukraine falls, and then what? Something so horrific that's going to happen. Under those circumstances, Europe will have to make a choice. They must either adjust.
No, but the American policy during the Cold War and since has not allowed Europeans to make a choice.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. They must either adjust to the expanding hegemony of a militarized Russia, led by a proven aggressor, accepting the world as it is in prescribed realist fashion. Again, as opposed to fighting, as opposed to what, to going to war against a nuclear superpower. That's the alternative. I mean, see, they present this, okay, all right, so you don't think we should accept the world as it is. So then you say, all right, so you want to go to war against Russia. And then, of course, once you put it that way, so, no, I'm not really suggesting that. We should just send Ukraine more weapons. Well, but how long can you go on doing that?
And who is the expanding hegemon?
That's right. That's it, exactly. Who's the expanding hegemon? Or they must prepare themselves to stand up to it without the United States. Well, that's not going to happen. I mean, that's the point. The stakes will be highest and most immediate for the Baltic nations, which in the eyes of traditional Russian nationalists such as Putin are mere appendages of Russia with significant...
Absolutely false.
Exactly.
Absolutely false.
With significant Russian-speaking populations that may at any time demand protection from Moscow, as the Sudeten Germans in Czechoslovakia demanded protection from Berlin in the 19th.
Well, the parallel is just completely incorrect, because the Sudeten Germans were never part of Germany. Okay, the Russian minorities that are in the Baltic states were part of the Soviet Union. Okay, they like to throw this trick at you all the time, but it's completely historically vacuous.
Right. Though, to be fair, the Sudetenland had been a part of Austria, and Austria by then was now a part of Germany. So having created the Reich of Austria within Germany, the Sudetenland say, yeah, well, we were part of Austria, so we should continue to be a part of Austria, a part of the this greater Germany. But in any case,
but George just gave the nuance. I was trying to do the same. Okay, Kagan wants to say it's exactly the same. Right. It's not.
Right. No, exactly. But again, they wouldn't be demanding protection
if they weren't being treated so badly.
Exactly. If you didn't threaten them. I mean, if you keep threatening them, telling them you're going to take away their right to vote, then they're going to go and seek protection. I mean, you can't complain.
You came across that story, like, I'm sorry, like a 73-year-old woman.
Yeah.
You're deporting her because she can't speak whatever language country she's in.
That's right. Exactly. So, he's going to demanding protection. Well, then don't treat them terribly. The Baltic states
treat them under EU law.
Under EU law.
That's it.
Exactly.
Just that.
That's right. The Baltic states have never enjoyed sovereign independence in periods of Russian hegemony and owe their independence today entirely to American and NATO guarantees. No, they owe them because they Gorbachev let them go.
Let them go.
The Soviet Union basically said, "You go." That's what they owe it to. They don't owe anything to NATO. Then there is Poland, which during the Cold War and repeatedly the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries was either subjugated or partitioned by Moscow. But what about weren't other countries involved in the partitioning of Poland? I mean, why is it only Moscow gets lambasted for partitioning Poland?
Well, I mean, when there's a partition, you get a part.
Yes.
Okay. There's a part there. Who got the other part? Oh, the Germans and the Austrians. Okay.
That's right. Will the Poles again go quietly into that good Russian night? Oh, good Russian night. Once they've been left deliberately exposed to the full weight of Russian power without the United States or NATO to back them up.
Well, they are in NATO, so it's completely ridiculous point to
Right.
make. Okay,
Right.
Ukraine is not.
Right. Yeah. But again, it also raises all kinds of questions as to, I mean, even under Stalin, the Soviet Union never incorporated Poland within the USSR. So
Though the emigre, we can call it in the literature the emigre. So the emigre Poles in Moscow, the emigre Czechs in Moscow, et cetera, et cetera. They wanted to be incorporated into the Soviet Union.
That's right. But that's exactly right. So, it's peculiar because if even the Soviet Union, when it was committed to communism, made no claim and saying you should be a part of the USSR, I'm not sure what would be the basis of Putin's claim on Poland. I don't. I mean, these are Poles; they're not Russians. I mean, I don't know how Putin could even make any kind of a claim on Poles. That Poles are part of the Russian Federation.
And nobody, well, I can say this, like 99.9% of the population in Russia would be against it.
It would be
vehemently against it.
Right, exactly. And then, so here it goes on. The most important nation in this transformed Europe will be Germany. Germans will quickly find themselves faced with a terrible choice.
They already do.
That's what I was thinking. Either they try to remain in a fundamentally pacifist mode, as they have been since 1945, or they once again become a great military power. So
well, why? That's a false binary.
That's right. Exactly. And then again, when you think about the Germans, there's obviously a very substantial opinion within Germany, which is not saying, "Oh, we got to be a pacifist." They're just saying, "Why are we having bad relations with Russia? What's the basis for it? How is that serving our interest to have bad relations with Russia?" But he presents it, fundamentally pacifist.
Why can't Germany have an Ostpolitik like they did before?
Yeah,
it worked.
That's right. That's it. But this, this referred to Germany as a pacifist mode. This kind of reminds me of the worst days of the Cold War, when you had these neocons who were becoming influential, screaming at Germany that Germany just wasn't sufficiently on board with the anti-Soviet U.S. foreign policies. Oh, Germans are just a bunch of pacifists, rather than, well, we have our own national interests. We have our own issues that we have to deal with. We can't, be used to be mobilized against the Soviet Union, particularly as we are divided. But I remember that argument, that Germans are pacifists, was constantly invoked during the Cold War. To defend themselves in the absence of an American guarantee, Germans, it brings out this American guarantee as if this is something that's real. There's an American guarantee. Germans will face a staggering uphill climb to match Russia's conventional weapons capabilities.
Or maybe they'll just cut a deal.
They're gonna, you think we have to, what do we need now? Yeah, we've got to match Russia's conventional weapons capabilities. Well, how about just simply, let's get that one of those gas pipelines, the one that's still working. Let's get it moving. Why do we have to match their conventional weapons capabilities? Why is that the order of business?
But they tried to do that before, George.
Right.
Between 1941 and 1945.
Right.
How did that work out?
It didn't work out, and that's why Germany doesn't want to go down that path. But they will also have to address Russia's overwhelming nuclear superiority, which Putin has not been shy about threatening to use, even against the nuclear-armed United States. Will the Germans rely on British and French nuclear capacities to deter Russia, since they can no longer count on the American nuclear umbrella?
This guy is so extreme.
This is so extreme, but no,
it's extremism here.
Yeah. But again, you have to scare people about these terrible things that are going to happen. if Trump comes to power. I mean, this is the nightmare. This is Trump's going to power. Suddenly, Germany cannot rely on the American nuclear umbrella, so we go to the British nuclear. Well, the British don't have any kind of an independent deterrent, so forget relying on the British, because the British depend on the United States. So if the United States says no, then that's that. So it's basically the French. Well, I don't think it's viable. Or will they choose to become a nuclear power themselves? Now, this is the point that I said before. Sooner or later, most countries are going to be nuclear powers. I mean, you can't maintain that little club that you had in the 1960s, where you have these 4 or 5 countries, well, 5 countries at the time, who had nuclear weapons and no one did. I mean, it just doesn't happen. It's like, keep having the light bulb. Everybody eventually will acquire nuclear weapons, because if you don't have them, you are always vulnerable. But on the other hand, the record of nuclear weapons has so far been that it's a deterrent. Once you have it, no one wants to mess with you. India and Pakistan, ever since they had both got acquired nuclear weapons, they've tried to avoid getting into wars with each other. But I think it's, the idea that, again, you go back to some moment, 1965, with a non-proliferation treaty, it's not going to happen. That's why, North Korea acquired nuclear weapons, and then other countries are going to do it. Indeed, should the United States make clear that it is no longer bound by its security guarantees, the likelihood is that other industrialized nations will quickly turn to nuclear weapons to try to make up for the sudden gap in their defenses. But, again, this is insane that we have these guarantees. So what you're saying is that the ideal world, a world of security and stability, where the United States makes all of these nuclear guarantees in this haphazard fashion, and that creates stability. I mean, that is really a guarantee for instability.
Well, particularly when you have this proxy war in Ukraine, because
exactly.
Then now this is on the agenda. It should never have
It should
come
never
on
have been
the
on the
agenda.
agenda. You should never have got yourself in a situation, Russia's, rattling its nuclear weapons. Well, then don't get yourself into a situation where you're obviously threatening Russia's vital national security interests. I mean, we know what Russia's nuclear doctrine is. They will use nuclear weapons if it's an existential matter for them. That's their nuclear doctrine. So why are you getting yourself in a situation where they might consider that this is an existential matter for them?
And if it were, in using that scenario, the European, and Kagan will not say this, but the Europeans know it's not Washington and New York that's going to be taken out. It's going to be Dusseldorf and Rome.
Right. No, exactly. Japan could build hundreds of nuclear weapons in a very short time if it chose, or do the new America Firsters believe the Japanese will find reassuring America's abandonment of similar treaty commitments in Europe. So again, you see how these people are just always living in this past, in this glorious moment. Whenever it was in the 1990s, sometimes it's the 1940s.
Well, no, we have to come up with a term for it. It's always the 1930s, and the domino theory is always in play.
Exactly. We will be living in a world of many heavily armed powers engaged in a multipolar arms race, ever poised for conflict. In short, the world that existed in the 1930s, only this time with nuclear weapons. Why was that necessarily the case? Again, why there'd be an arms race and ever poised for conflict? Again, India and Pakistan both have nuclear weapons. Things have been fairly calm for many, many years now. They don't like each other particularly, but they're not going to war as they were, was it, I think, 3 times between 1948 and 1971. But yes, they were spending more than 2% of their GDP on defense. And then how long before China, we're on to China, before watching America abandon its allies in Europe, ask whether Americans still plan to live up to any of their commitments elsewhere. So this is the domino theory. This is the doomsday scenario.
I see no reason. I don't know. George and I sometimes differ on this. I mean, my view is that the Chinese are just watching the Americans grapple with the loss of hegemony, and they're just going to keep going on with their line of business. Okay. I mean, this throwing in the China threat is again, just it's fear mongering.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Because that's not really the way China thinks. I don't think China has ever thought that the way to resolve problems is by going to war. I mean, I think it's much more of a European way of thinking. I don't think China thinks, well, the way we've got to resolve the Taiwan problem is by invading Taiwan. I don't think that's at all the Chinese mentality.
No.
And then Hitler also hoped that the United States would focus exclusively on Asia and leave Europe to him.
Well, then why did he declare war on the United States?
Right.
This is.
It is no surprise that among the most frightened by Trump's talk of abandoning NATO is Taiwan. That's funny because Trump was quite friendly with Taiwan. I mean, so you know, I mean, my recollection is that Trump was actually rather friendly with Taiwan.
And Biden continued the policy.
That's right, exactly. An older generation of Americans, many of whom may vote for Trump this year, may not live to see the consequences. Why? Oh, because they're so old. Okay. Those crises will fall on their children and grandchildren. It's a bit nasty. I mean, you're saying, well, these old people, these old fogies are going to vote for Trump. Well, you're not going to live with the consequences, but your grandchildren might. But they can be sure of this: if they vote for a return to the 1930s, posterity is not going to mistake them for America's greatest generation. So that's the essay. Again, a very mean-spirited ending.
It got more. Did you notice how it deteriorated as we went through?
Yes, he went along. Yeah, he had to do the whole.
He did the full Monty in the
exactly.
end.
It was a real domino theory. So one after another. Germany's going to do this, and the Baltics are going to do that. Poland, the another, and then down to China, Japan, and whoa.
And he wrote this in a bomb shelter, George.
Exactly. That's right. But I think it is very interesting. I mean, the thrust of it is this hysteria about anybody returning to a sensible foreign policy, the realist foreign policy that America was once committed to, and which American presidents, Republican presidents, were realists. Nixon, Eisenhower belonged to that tradition, and Reagan also, to a great extent, they belonged to that tradition. They did not have a kind of messianic view of the world. They didn't see that America should go, fighting. I can't remember the exact phrase that John Quincy Adams, monsters to slay. That was the
in search of monsters to slay.
Search of monsters to slay. That was that was not their policy. They were rooted in that pre-World War II realist, sensible policy. Unfortunately, the neocons have been predominant for many years, and they still want to retain their levers of power.
Yeah, and also, if you look at the military-industrial complex for short term, they've never wanted to have a democratic discussion about it. I mean, there was, because the protests in Vietnam, yes, there ended up being a political discussion about it, and there was real pros and cons. I can remember it as a child. Okay, but we haven't had that since.
Right.
We have. I mean, it's if we don't fight them over there, we have to fight them over here. That's what they've been doing ever since. Yeah. And this is just, this Kagan guy has been around a long time, but his intellectual faculties are getting weaker and weaker and more facile.
Right. Yeah, we have to fight them over there. It was a very weak argument during the time of Vietnam, again, because when you present that domino theory, we have to fight them over there, because then, so what do you argue? You're arguing that North Vietnam invaded the United States. I mean, is that the idea, that somehow if we don't hold them off in the jungles of the Mekong Delta, we're going to have to fight them in Seattle? I mean, it was a ludicrous notion even then. But the idea of sort of wheeling this out after all the dismal times that America's had to endure. But that's what Kagan and the Nuland and the rest of them, they want to foist this on the United States, and they are dominant. They're still the dominant force. I mean, Biden, it belongs in this tradition.
Yeah, and like you said, MSNBC will be chewing on this for a week. Okay,
major essay, an important essay,
pearls of wisdom. Okay, the adults in the room and all.
That's
of this.
Right.
Okay,
adults in the room. Exactly.
As we've already mentioned here, this entire mindset of these globalists thinking, yeah, I like that term. I think that's exactly what it is.
Right.
Is it creates we're in the 1930s perennial. We're always in the 1930s because of these people.
That's right. Exactly. It's always the 1930s. And as I say, for some reason, it's never pre-1914. It's never the sort of the mad rush to war, which led to the catastrophe of war catastrophes with the Great War. That you've always forgotten that one, but it's always somehow the 1930s. You know, why aren't we rushing to war? Why aren't we sending our forces? Well, they didn't do it then because they saw that this would be a catastrophic war. And World War II was a catastrophic war. And so therefore those who were hesitating were right to hesitate, because it was going to, and it was, going to result in even more destruction, even more loss of lives than the Great War.
Yeah, and Soviet leaders / Russian leaders, with the exception of one, and George and I have talked about it for endlessly, one misunderstood the outcome of the Second World War, and that was Gorbachev.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Because the Russians now are saying, yeah, we were right all along. I mean, we got this one right. Okay. You put your guard down and they're going to come at you like termites.
That's right. Exactly. You put your guard down. Exactly. Of course, you never put your guard down. I mean, I don't know, what kind of an idiot puts his guard down? It's like, yeah. Oh, we just put our gun down, and then go and have a snack.
Yeah, I mean, we've said here before, but remember, fine, you can disband the Warsaw Pact, fine, but there were treaties for Soviet troops to be in East Berlin.
Yep.
Okay, we're just gonna stay. Okay,
that's right. No, exactly.
We're honoring international law.
That's right. We're not going anywhere.
We're not going. Why should we go anywhere?
Exactly. You want to, you want to go to war to push us out? I mean, go ahead. But that was it. That was when they had leverage. Once you pull your forces out, you don't have any leverage. But yeah, absolutely, they had, they had the agreements. There were the wartime agreements. There was the four power, the 1971 four power agreement on Berlin. We're staying put until we get commitments, serious commitments on paper for our national security. Until then, no one's going anywhere.
It's again, this is all part of the election. It's all about this whole barrage of ridiculous nonsense being said about Donald Trump has said a few things, okay, and they extrapolated from it. For our foreign viewers here, that's called, being on the stump. I mean, Trump is prone to hyperbole on normal days. Okay, when you're campaigning, he lets it rip. Okay, right. But one thing is for sure, and maybe Kagan's got this one right. He didn't say it, but I can feel it. Is that if Trump does come back into the White House, he's going to be far better prepared in dealing with these people.
I agree.
And he's going to have arguments against these people, and it's going to resonate with the heartland of America. I mean, it'll be crystal clear what he has to say. The only good thing that, if he does come back, the only good thing we can hope for is that he learned his lesson by keeping the riffraff from being around him. Okay. Yep. There's some really smart, good people out there. Okay. So Kagan, he's scared. He's very scared. But he should be scared because he's created the conditions. It's not Donald Trump, this wizard, this genius. No, I mean, he's been given stuff on a silver platter, and decades of failure, sending our young boys and girls to die for what? Okay. I mean, he berelled himself, if you read this in the right way. Right. And we tried to express that here.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's an ongoing thing, and one war after another, and each time, we're not going to make these mistakes again. Everyone said this after Vietnam. It's never going to happen again. No, everything that we did, we're not going to do again. The game with Iraq. No, we're never going to do this again. And then in no time at all, Barack Obama, who said, "No stupid wars, no stupid wars," and then he goes straight right into Libya. We've gone through this all the time, and we keep getting the same people who are in power. Anthony Blinken, he goes from one administration, Clinton, Obama, now with Biden, same people. And Trump, during his first term was also, only too eager to accept the same characters, with the General Mattis, General Kelly, and all, and they just simply ignored him when pursued their own policies. So yeah, this time he will be prepared. He's not going to just go in and just trust the same people. Otherwise, you're going to get the same policy.
And those that want to write the political obituary of Victoria Nuland, I wouldn't do that if I were you.
No.
I would not do that.
I wouldn't do that.
Okay?
She's still young. I don't think she's going anywhere.
Actually, one could make the case is that she got out before the shit hit the fan. And she'll be back and say, "I told you so. I wasn't around when that happened. I told you."
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot. There's a lot of stuff can go on. And the Kagan, he's a force in Washington, and he also isn't going anywhere. None of these people is going anywhere. The Washington Post isn't going anywhere. New York Times isn't going anywhere. Richard Haas isn't going anywhere, and so on. So yeah, these people are bad news, and bad news is here to stay.
Only old age keeps Elliot Abrams at bay. Okay.
Yeah, but even he's not that old. I think he's still young enough to serve.
Feisty guy.
Exactly.
All right, everybody. We couldn't pass this one. How many words do you think that was?
I probably about 6,000-7,000.
Yeah.
It's
I'm sure Victoria Nuland read the drafts.
Exactly. Oh, this is wonderful.
Robert,
think? This is wonderful.
This is your first podcast. What do you think?
I want something in the tip jar.
He's
really getting the tip jar.
He's really overwhelmed here. Let me see here.
Are you overwhelmed?
I'm overwhelmed.
There
you go.
Tip jar.
Say hi to everyone, Apple. There you go.
Apple. Oh, that's sweet.
He's sleepy. He's
sleepy now. Yeah.
All right, everybody. This is our Sunday wrap, right, buddy? This is the Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on Local, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. And as Buddy is reminding me in a very loud way, George has his first live stream on Tuesday.
3 p.m. We're back to the 3 p.m. Eastern time schedule. Please join me. Come with comments, criticisms, ideas, opinions, suggestions on the way out the door. Remember, we still have Buddy to deal with, and Buddy's making clear, I've had it up to here. I need something in the tip jar. Apple isn't helping. And we've got to get Apple trained to make his pitch. For
he will.
Tip jar. Yeah. But so if you have a few bob in your pocket, whip them out, dunk them in his tip jar. That might soothe his.
Soothe him. How would Bernie say that? Soothe him.
Soothe him. So we're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology. And above all, we might get Buddy into a better mood. And I don't think he's going to be in a good mood until Apple starts pulling his weight. I mean, there's not much weight there, but I think Apple was going to have to start pulling his weight for the tip jar. So remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.